Well, I am thrilled to have Dr. Mindy Pelz on the show for the second time, which rarely happens, but she is really one of my favorite guests and podcast hosts. And I know so many of you love her too. So many of you guys already know Dr. Mindy from our first podcast where we talked about her best-selling book, The Menopause Reset, which I loved, loved, loved. And it was such an easy read. And what many of you told me already makes menopause understandable. And now we're going to talk about her latest book, which is coming out December 27th, called Fast Like a Girl. And I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy, and I now have a ton of questions about fasting for women. Now, you also probably know about Dr. Mindy, but just in case you don't, she is not only a best-selling author and podcast host of the Resetter podcast. Go and listen to that one right now. But she's also a great keynote speaker, a nutrition and functional medicine expert, and has spent over 20 years of her life helping thousands of people reclaim their health, particularly us women. And you guys have also got to check out Dr. Mindy's YouTube channel. She has so much free information there where she explains the latest science and research on everything related to fasting and more. But then she also gives us really practical tools that we can use. And when she first came on the show last year, she had about 250,000 subscribers there. And now she is close to 400,000 with millions and millions of views. So she's not messing around when she says she's on a mission to get 1 million people fasting. And she probably already needs to add an S to that and make it millions. So without further ado, meet Dr. Mindy. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Zora. I'm so happy to be here. I love chatting with you. So thank you for having me.
We're really grateful you're here to clear up a lot of confusion. But before we start, I first want to say happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. I know I turned 53 a week ago. It was the first birthday that I honestly was like, my age does not match how my body, my mind, my soul feels. Like you can call me 53, but I don't look at myself that way. So it was kind of a trippy birthday that way.
And it's going to keep going and more like that. I guarantee you, because you're taking such good care of your health, and the population is changing, right? We need more examples like you to disrupt those ageist stereotypes. And that's my gerontology hat talking. So I'm not going to talk more about that, but that's a whole other conversation. But thank you so much for being a good example as well for all of us. Now, I want to first talk about the biggest elephant in the room and clear up a lot of confusion, and that's fasting for active and athletic women in menopause, because a lot of listeners in the Hack My Age podcast here are women over 50, and many of them are athletic. And they've heard me say this before because I went through Dr. Stacy Sims' course called Menopause for Athletes. You know Dr. Stacy Sims? Have you?
I know her work. I know of her. I've actually invited her on my podcast and she won't come. So I would love to have a discussion with her.
Oh my gosh.
So instead I'm going to have it through you. And when I saw like your questions, I was like, yeah, let's go for it. Cause I have a lot to say about her work for sure.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's a dream of mine when I'm listening to you and your podcast to say, okay, I want to have a podcast with you and Dr. Stacy Sims and Dr. Longo as well, because
that would be amazing.
He's another
one. He's another one that I have had some interesting run-ins with because his CEO was really upset about my positioning on fast mimicking and Prolon. Yeah. So it's kind of the dark side of health influencing, I guess, is that, you know, there's territories to be had and sometimes people don't want to be challenged. And so that's
interesting. Oh, we'll have to dig deeper into that because, you know, in my gerontology master's course, he was one of my professors. And so
great.
he has, whenever I brought up Prolon, it was kind of, I don't want to mix, you know, my professor hat and my business and things like that, because he's dedicated his whole life to fasting mimicking diet. Like
Yes.
that's his thing.
Right.
So
Right.
if anything messes with that or goes against the grain, you can see how somebody may react. And,
That's right.
but I think in all professionalism and science is science, science evolves. I mean, I think it would be very important for scientists to also recognize that the science changes, and maybe sometimes they're not 100% right. I don't know, or accept other people's challenges or perspectives. So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. And we can dive into that. But I think for the audience to really understand is that when we see researchers like Walter Longo and Stacy Sims, like come out with, here's what the research is showing us. That's only one side of the health equation. And I'm a big fan of research. I put a ton in the new book, Fast Like a Girl. It's all over my YouTube channel. But research gets us in the ballpark. Now we've got to choose what seat we're going to sit in. And I find that we have to take research and then take the application of that research and look at it over a wide group of people before we make any declarations about this is good or this is bad. When it comes to health, there are no absolutes. So there's only the path for you. And on both of those researchers, I have so much admiration for them. And let's make it applicable individually to each woman. Let's not cookie cutter us into women's research is now saying this. Let's really still make our health path unique to us.
Absolutely. We are the N of one experiment. The only person that matters is you.
That's right.
So that's always, I agree that that's the biggest problem with health research is a study comes out and then we all jump on it thinking this is gold. And sometimes when I was health coaching before had clients who come to me and say, oh, this study shows X, Y, or Z. And I really want to try it. I really think it'd be great. And it's going to solve all my problems. And I said, well, look, this study is done on 50-year-old Finnish men. Now you're a 38-year-old Asian woman. I mean, maybe it'll work, maybe not. I don't know, but we can't just put all our faith in that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And in the new book, I really mapped out like some of my favorite studies. And I say when they're done on mice, when they're done on mixed, and to Stacy's point, we don't have a lot on women. And that's a problem. But I actually also think we're really hard to study because even if you took a bunch of women, let's say you take 1,000 women that are menstruating, you would need to put all the ones that are ovulating together in one category, all the ones that are in the week before their period. Like you would have to separate us out, which is why how expensive that would be for a study. Yeah. So I actually think our expectation that we need more research on women, I don't think it's going to happen because it has to not just be women. It has to be women in the same hormonal time of life, in the same hormonal part of our cycle.
Yeah, that would be the ideal. But I think until we get there, let's take anything right now.
Well, you're right. We could take anything. Yeah.
Get women as opposed to just men and as I understand the research, most research is done on men and most research, it's required to have women involved in the studies. Good. But still so much of the data doesn't get into the study. They leave out the data very often, and which is, gosh, that's just so frustrating. So hopefully, I really am advocating for more women in research studies. And I think of course it's going to be expensive, but we're 50% of the population, a little bit more, right? So why aren't we included in this? And it's so important for the drugs that we come out, the vaccinations that are there, for the health techniques, everything. We need more research, and somebody's got to pay for it. It's got to be done. But ideally, wouldn't it be great, to do that study with women cycling or any studies? But then again, of course, women have different days of their cycle, and some are more, some are shorter. I mean, how do you even tackle that? And then forget women in perimenopause because our cycles are all over the place.
Right.
So. Right. But, it's not an excuse. We need more. But That's a dream. I really hope one day I can have you and Stacy Sims in the same room, or
I would
somebody at
love
least
it.
out there, and talk about it, because
Yeah.
so I'll be, in the meantime, I'll share what I learned from her, and you
Yeah,
can
let's go for
answer
it.
back. And so
Okay.
what she has done, so this is a great course, the menopause for athletes, and she defines an athlete as anyone who does planned exercise. So if you just go to a gym a couple times a week, you're doing
Yeah.
some planned exercise. And she strongly opposes fasting and keto diets for women, particularly athletic women and women going through menopause. And she says it's because the studies are done mostly on men, particularly sedentary men, and they get great results. There's stellar results. And but the few studies that she's found on women, and the ones that she pulled out for us, had negative effects. And she seems to be fine with a 12-hour fast, but not so much more than that. And she basically says that fasting is a stress on the body, which I think you and I both agree with.
Yep. Yep.
Exercise is also a stress
Right.
on the
Yep.
body.
Yep.
Both can be positive stressors when done appropriately, but when they're combined, it's not a great idea. And
Right.
sort of that's her worry, and her argument is that exercise, that's her whole thing, is, she said that's her whole following as well, athletic women. Exercise can have the same effects as fasting. And she's worried that women who are exercising are missing out on fueling their workouts, which happens a lot. And because they're fasting too much or not eating enough, and they're putting themselves into what she calls a low energy state and just not getting enough calories. So I think her positioning, her background, her following is these athletic women. So she's there to protect them. And I think she definitely has a point. Longo, he's dealing with a lot of sick people who got cancer and diabetes and heart disease. And so, his audience is another thing. So we all have different audiences. And so would love for you to speak to my audience who tend to be a little bit more athletic, or women over 50 for sure. Some of them are going through menopause, perimenopause. And so what are your thoughts on fasting for these age groups, and what Dr. Stims has to say?
It's such a good question. Again, I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you, because let me simplify how we look at this. We got to go down to the sex hormone level. And when we look at the sex hormones that drive men and women, they're vastly different. So men are driven by testosterone. They get testosterone every 15 minutes, comes pulsing in. Testosterone goes up into the brain and converts into estrogen. So they really only have one hormonal target. And all the research on fasting and testosterone shows that, yes, in a man, he can fast 13 hours, raise testosterone by 1,300%. He can fast 24 hours and raise testosterone by 2,000%. Any man that's not fasting is crazy. So I will 1,000% agree with Stacy that men get incredible results with fasting, and it largely because of its influence on testosterone. Now, women, we have three hormones that run us. We have estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. We don't get testosterone every 15 minutes. If you're a cycling woman, you get it during ovulation. That's it. And we don't have any studies on what testosterone specifically and fasting for a woman, what it does. So can we increase? I've seen a few that said it takes a woman about 24 hours to get that same 1,300% increase in testosterone. I have seen some evidence on that. I also have seen some clinical evidence in our online community of when women are fasting and cycling their fast the way that I recommend, according to their menstrual cycle, we're seeing testosterone come up. But in the new book, you'll see that I recommend we keep fasts under 15 hours. During ovulation, because we don't want to create any kind of autophagy that could have a negative effect on testosterone. So I map that all out in the book. But that's what we know about testosterone. Estrogen in a woman does really well with low glucose, low insulin. So if you are a cycling woman, day one through right before you ovulate, going into keto, going into fasting has been amazing. I have seen clinically I mean, literally, like to your point, across millions of women, we have millions of comments that come in every month onto my YouTube. So I feel like I've got a really good eye as to how these are working in the application. And what we're seeing is when we have estrogen imbalances, things like infertility, PCOS, weight loss resistance can also be from toxic estrogen, too much toxic estrogen. That if we have a woman go keto and fasting in her follicular phase, and that first part from day 1 to day 10, she loses weight, she gets pregnant, and PCOS is overturned. I have seen that over and over and over again. So estrogen loves for insulin to be a little lower, glucose to be a little lower. You can spike cortisol with estrogen, and estrogen doesn't seem to mind. Now, progesterone is 100% the opposite. You spike cortisol and progesterone gets shy. You stay too low in glucose, and estrogen is going to increase your cravings. So the week before our cycle, we are actually more insulin resistant. Our body wants you to bring glucose up, so it gives you cravings of carbohydrates. It wants you to not have any stress because progesterone does really poorly in light of cortisol. So it makes you feel tired. It makes you feel more inner, all the things we've experienced for so many years. The week before our cycle and villainized it was actually progesterone telling you what she wanted. And it's crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah. It's your body knows best. It knows exactly what it needs. We just keep shutting it down.
That's right. So we have these 3 hormones that just we need to handle differently. So on one hand, I can agree with Stacy. Cortisol is not great for progesterone. It's keeping insulin low, not great for progesterone. Estrogen doesn't really matter as much. So when she says a woman doesn't respond like that, I would agree when we're looking at progesterone, and I disagree when we're looking at estrogen. And you're dealing with a woman who has to take all 3 sex hormones into play. This is why we have to fast differently than men.
Okay. So later on, I want you to go through the menstrual cycle and the 3 sex hormones too. So I see that there's so many women, including me at a time where I was only 50 and I had no idea what progesterone, estrogen, I just, testosterone. I thought it was just a man's thing. So I think there's still a lot of women out there who are listening who they've heard these words, they know it applies to them, but I'd love for you to explain a little bit later. But before we do that, so you have gone through thousands of women on their fasts. And I'm sure you've learned a lot. I'm sure there have been mistakes that have been made. I'm sure that, so even though there are no studies or very few studies done on women, it sounds like you've got a pretty big study going on for the last, 10 years or so with your fasting community.
Huge study.
It's a pity that it's not like really, recorded in a sense, in a scientific way, and just throw it at the scientists and say, okay, this is what we found. So, but it's, even though it's anecdotal or it's not a formal research study, it is giving us a lot of information in a practical sense. Yes. And that counts, I think. Yes. So I appreciate you sharing what you found, regardless of what the studies say or don't say. And so that's important. And what Dr. Sims agrees with you in that sense that so your thing is fasting, her thing is exercise. So she would say when progesterone is high, that week before your period, then that's when you want to take down your exercise. You don't want to hit it so hard, right?
Agreed.
They'll say, hit it hard ovulation when testosterone is up, hit it hard the first week. So she's very much in alliance with, she's training according to your cycle and you're fasting according to your cycle. So I know that you guys would definitely agree on that point too. So she's very mindful of that. It's just that the fasting point is really hard for her to digest, particularly in women already are not fueled enough. They're
Right.
they're an athletic community, and these are menopausal women or perimenopausal women who we're becoming more insulin sensitive and insulin resistant. We are cannot seem to be eating the same things anymore. And what do? We exercise more and we eat less. And for
Right.
somebody who's an athletic, and you're an athlete yourself, and you're a tennis player, I mean, you've gone through it, you know, it's easy to exercise. I mean, it's if you like it, you found something, your jam, then, and if you're setting goals, you just go and you do, pain, no pain. And then that can be an appetite suppressant. So you can if you can get into the mindset of a woman who's in, around perimenopause and menopausal, who wants to run a marathon, who wants to do a triathlon. I just told my friend who's a personal trainer, I was like, I've never done a triathlon. I want to do it. Prepare me. Right. So get into this mindset. And I keep thinking, gosh, when I really start, I got to eat a lot. I got to really make sure I feed this body, because if I don't provide it the nourishment, the nutrients, the calories, and I'm going to fail, or I won't be optimized, and I may be even hurting myself. So that's where I think a person who's listening, who is an athlete or is a bit more athletic, how do you think they need to take their fasting? Should they fast early, or should they alter their fasting compared relative to the general population that you're speaking to in the book?
Yeah, it's also a great question. So let me, in this part of the discussion, and I want to make sure we don't leave the perimenopause and postmenopause women out of that, because out of this discussion, because the hardest thing I've had is we've got three groups. We've got the cycling woman, we've got the perimenopausal woman, and then we have the postmenopausal woman. So vastly different hormonal times. With the cycling woman, I 1000% agree with Stacy that cardio, push your exercise in the front half of your cycle. During ovulation, you've got so much testosterone, build some muscle, like go in heavy with weights and build yourself, use that testosterone, and then lean into yoga, take some recovery the week before your cycle. I think, why have we not, I don't know if you know Tony Horton from P90X.
Yeah, I don't know him, but yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, so he and I had it geeked out on this. I'm like, why do we do weekly workouts for women? Why don't we do monthly schedules for women? And he was like, I never thought about that. So anyway, so that's for the cycling woman. When we look at perimenopause and menopause, here's what we have to keep in mind. Is after 40, although it's happening a little earlier, these ovaries are going into retirement. They're like, I'm backing out, and the ovaries have been the primary driver of sex hormone production. So what they're going to do throughout your 40s and your whole perimenopause and menopausal experience is they're going to pass the baton over to your adrenal glands. So what I've noticed as an athletic 53-year-old is that the running the marathons, the top endurance events, like they are not in my biological best interest anymore. And part of that is because I need to have great adrenal function. So I need to make sure the whole HPA axis is working right. If I go running into my 40s, I'm adrenal depleted, and I'm now losing those sex hormones, and then I decide I'm becoming the 3-day water fast queen, or I'm going to go do a bunch of CrossFit, this is where we see another level of tanking for women, and that doesn't work. So if you're over 40, you've got to make sure your adrenals are high and functioning at their best, because they've got multiple jobs now. They are making you sex hormones along with cortisol. So that is a big job for that organ. So to her point, that if you tap fasting on top of that, and you're in extreme sports, that combination for the 45-year-old adrenal fatigued woman or the 55-year-old adrenal fatigued woman is not great. Mm-hmm. So let's start with this idea of let's bring back adrenal function so the adrenals can handle both jobs. Now, on top of that, what I want women to understand is that those three hormones all play by different rules, which is where I started with this, which means the continuous fasting, the continuous keto. It's not good for any woman, but for the menopause and perimenopausal woman, she needs to make sure that she has some days where she's fasting longer, she's going keto. On those days, exercise should not be super strenuous. You know, like you can decide, like let estrogen kind of do its thing. She needs days where she is going to make sure that she's doing yoga and she's relaxing more to recovery so we can focus on progesterone. So, and on that day, we want to bring in more nourishing food. But then when we've got testosterone, she needs to push that workout, work a little more with a smaller fasting window. We need to bring all the principles together to help her customize what's right for where her hormones are at. Mm. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So what you're saying, so what we've in your book, I love that you created this ketobiotic diet.
Oh, thank you.
It's not the ketogenic diet. It's your own take on it, which I think is really good and actually is quite in alignment with Dr. Stacy Sims, who understands we're more insulin resistant. We have harder problems, digesting the high refined carbohydrates. We need to keep that lower. However, she's very much like, we got to eat our carbs. We need our carbs, especially if you're exercising, right? We need to fuel our bodies in that sense. So she would say, be mindful of those carbohydrates. Like you say, lean into those potatoes and sweet potatoes and quinoa and we're not talking about potato chips here so, that's where she definitely, she's not saying do a low carb diet, but she's just saying choose your carbohydrates wisely and make sure you get enough of them. Now, the question then is, your book is so great in the way it's so detailed in the sense that it really holds your hand on day one, you do this, day two. And if you don't have a cycle, okay, you start at the full moon, right? Or you start when, you choose a day, right? And you follow this 30-day reset, let's say. So it's really great. However, what I'm wondering then, if I'm during, week 1 to during the follicular phase between day 1 and day 10 or 12, let's say, I got my estrogen is high. I feel like smashing it at the gym. I can work out really well. However, it's also a good time to fast, to lean into those 2-3 day fasts or 24-hour fasts. But then I get worried, well, wait a second, if I'm maybe smashing at the gym, should I really be fasting? Do those people have limitations? And should those people be leaning more into those carbohydrates and that you would say are more reserved for during our, when progesterone's up, when in the luteal phase of our cycle?
Yeah, here's the way that in the new book I put it. And actually what I love about the new book is that it is all the current research or current observation that we're seeing with these women across the world. And I have cycled 2 diets, ketobiotic. I call it ketobiotic because what I noticed in the keto movement is that everybody went low carb, which meant they left fruits and vegetables out. Yeah. And in my ketobiotic version, I not only bring fruits and vegetables back in, the biotic is let's feed your microbiome, but I even increased protein a little bit more so that we make sure we're adding in protein, because as women, we need more protein. And I feel like we should talk about that because that's a really key concept. So you can do ketobiotic, let's just say for a menstruating woman, you do it from day 1 to day 10 of your cycle. You can do if you want to do the exercise, if you want to do it all during that time, that's going to be your best time to really push it, which is why I call it the power phase, because you can power up on all these tools. But then you're going to need to recover. And the recovery comes in ovulation. So I actually I started having women go into higher carb during ovulation. So I call them hormone feasting foods, where we bring in the squashes and the potatoes and we step them out of keto. Now, I will tell you that this is the hardest thing about writing a book, is that I don't believe in absolutes. So I believe in women finding their own way. So let me make some nuance around ovulation. I have seen some women be able to rock keto and fasting and ovulation, and I've seen some women's hormones get decimated if they do keto and fasting during ovulation. So in the book, I say you keep your fast under 15 and let's move into more high carbs. So I think that will work for most women. Then when we come out of ovulation, our hormones dip, we can go back into more keto, more fasting, push those exercises. And then the week before we go back into, I call it the nurture phase in the book, that we got to nurture ourselves. Don't push exercise, eat more carbs because that's what your body demands. So actually in hearing you, I actually think Stacey and I may be more aligned than we are different, because I don't believe in keto and fasting every single day of the month and pushing it, which is when these two trends happened. That's what women did. And that's probably what Stacey's responding to, is the amount of women that just jumped on the fasting and keto train and just did it all month long and didn't take their adrenals into consideration, didn't take their cycle into consideration. And that was hurtful to their bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. That's what I see now, hearing you as well, and going through the book. It's gotta be, I think one thing you really did you made a good point about was that we're all bio-individual. We really, like, you just kind of give a guide, like, this is what I'm seeing in my community. This is what the research says. This is generally, but we all have to, I think, take responsibility of our own bodies and say, if it's not working, if you feel bad, that's fine. Just change something. Don't just keep going just because Dr. Mindy said, or Zora said, or Dr. Stim said. That's a really good point. And the keto biotic diet, it just, just to get, I really like that you've modified that, because in my health coaching days, I noticed the guys were doing great. The women were just like dying after the first week. They just missed their fruit and their vegetables, and they did have some, results in the beginning, but it just was too demanding. So we'd always kind of alter it. And you create a perfect way, because, again, the studies that Dr. Stims pulls out, keto diet's great on men. Most of the research done on men, sedentary, obese men. Great. The one thing you did say about keto diets for post-menopausal sedentary women, they did lose some weight. They had some improved insulin sensitivity and their mood was a bit better. But they had increases in cardiovascular risk factors and a decrease in their bone mineral density, and not surprisingly, a reduction in the microbiome diversity, which we need for a healthy gut. Well, because you pulled out all those vegetables.
That's right. I mean, on the microbiome issue, for everybody, when you hear people say that fasting destroys the microbiome, I want you to remember that fasting's only one side of the equation. What it does is it changes the terrain in your gut. And when you go back into food, you need to make sure you go back into foods that feed the microbiome. When you compare a good food diet that supports healthy microbiome with these fasts, that's the magic. But when we look at studies, we're just looking at the fasting studies and we're like, oh, it decimated the microbiome. But it didn't. In the fast, it changed it. It took down both the good and the bad. It changed the pH in there. It repaired the inner lining. It created this geographical diversity where the microbes are more separated. They're not all clumped together. And so you could absorb your food better. So now feed those bacteria, create that new environment. It's like a clean slate for your microbiome. And then the other thing I would say is women, we have to, especially perimenopause and menopausal women, why I really introduced the ketobiotic version is that we have to remember that our gut breaks estrogen down. So if we go back to the example you just gave of sedentary postmenopausal women destroying their microbiome and affecting estrogen levels, well, again, what did they eat when they weren't doing keto and fasting to feed their microbiome? What other strategies do they have for their microbiome? Because that plays a part in how estrogen is going to get broken and used by the body.
Absolutely. And that's so much, usually it's not included in those studies as well, right?
Right.
They're just
Right.
doing the fast.
Right.
And that's, if I remember Dr. Longo, he said, fasting is great or whatever, but it's the refeeding that's more important than the actual fast.
Yeah.
And what are
I would agree.
yeah.
I would agree. It's equally important. In the new book, it's so important that I did a whole chapter on breaking your fast, and we have a bunch of recipes in there on that of small meals you could use to break your fast with. It's because to me, breaking the fast is as important as the length of the fast.
Exactly. So actually thinking about, this, the study or the research that shows that it's, decreases your microbiome diversity in terms of keto or fasting. It seems to also suppress the immune system for a while, but then jumps back into a better immune system. So it's kind of like, I think we need to remind people that it sounds horrible sometimes, you think, well, if you just stop the study there, you just only talk about the negative effects. Well, yeah, there are negative effects. Even Dr. Longo went through the whole caloric restriction, forgot what the biosphere project that was done with these people, and then caloric restriction. They all just great numbers in the beginning, and then the caloric restriction went a little bit too far, and then suddenly their numbers tanked and all their biomarkers tanked. So if you take something too far, obviously it's not good for you. So this is what we got, hormesis, right? It's, small stressors and small doses are great, but too long is not good for you. So in terms of the immune system, that's something for some people think about if they want to reboot their immune system. When do they, what's the minimum amount of time in terms of what's happening, I guess, to the immune system as you're fasting, in terms of it gets lowered, and then when does it improve, and what are the little details and nuances with that?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a couple of them. And one thing I want to go back to what you just said is that we have to remember with fasting studies that a lot of what we're seeing is the breaking down of the bad. So when we put somebody in these fasting windows, let's use Walter Longo's 72-hour fast. What he saw is on the third day, as we got closer to that 72-hour mark, old white blood cells were recycled out and new ones emerged. Okay, if he had stopped at that point where he just saw the old ones recycled out, he might have said, hey, you know what? It's just the old ones recycling out. But instead, what he noticed is that there was a reboot of new ones emerging. So his 72-hour water fast is amazing. And we don't have it specifically for women. I know I believe the study was done on both men and women going through cancer chemotherapy. That was originally what he did. So in that one, we saw both sides of the equation. If we look at something like thyroid, this is a big one that shows up. When we look at all the thyroid studies, it says that T3 goes down in a fasted state. But if you don't go and look at the other studies that say what happens after you fast and you reintroduce food, T3 actually doubles and starts to go up. So in order to answer the immune system question, we have to remember that in a fasted state, there's a bit of a catabolic reaction that's happening where the body is breaking down what is no longer serving it, so that when we introduce food back in, that food does what it's supposed to do. Healthy food is medicine. So if you tack on a healthy diet to these different fasting windows, I put 6 of them in the book, this is where we're seeing the results. So it's not the fast alone. So I really want to point that out, because I'm getting exhausted with the number of people that are taking these studies as their hero. No, you're the hero of your own health, and you have to understand what happened after the study was over. Yeah. So with that, here's what we know about the immune system. This was a mouse study. done out of MIT that after 24 hours of fasting, there was intestinal stem cells showed up and repaired the microbiome. So that is a form of the immune system, because the immune system is largely in our gut. And we have Volter's study that at 72 hours, we see the whole immune system reboot itself. We also have another interesting study that I reference in the book, that at 48 hours, we not only get a reset of our dopamine system, but we start to get more anti-aging antioxidants that get spun off of the Krebs cycle. So things like NAD, that people are going and getting massive NAD drips, start to kick in at 48 hours of fasting. Wow. So for immune system, and the other study we have is that when the cells are in a state of autophagy, viruses don't replicate if they enter into a cell that is in a state of autophagy, that it shuts down viral replication. So anything from a 17-hour fast to a 72-hour fast is going to be an immune enhancing fast for you. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, I do 2-3 day water fasts or longer a year to get rid of old senescent dysfunctional cells, to reboot my immune system. I do 24-hour fasts weekly to be able to reboot my whole intestinal system. And I throw in a couple of 17-hour fasts a week. So I try to kind of vary it and lean into all different ones depending on what aspect of the immune system I'm trying to affect.
You did a really great breakdown in the book as well, in terms of the different types of fasts. You had 6 of them, and the lengths, and what was the purpose. Like, you talk a lot about, what is your purpose? Is it to lose weight? Is it to heal your gut? Is it to activate autophagy? Or, so many things. So I think when people read the book, it'll be really, really clear, because when we say fasting, like, what does that even mean? It's like
what does it mean? Right.
Broad term. Like, I'm asleep and I wake up and I fasted. Right. Yeah. So you do break it down really well. So I'd love to move on to the myths, truths and myths. I had a whole list.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Of truth and myths. And I'd love to get through some of them before I open the mics for everybody else. So we'll go maybe 5 or 10 minutes with this. So the truth, so you've already busted some myths as well. I already, that first half, but some people would say fasting is bad for your thyroid. We went through that. It suppressed it in the beginning, but obviously if you let it go, and I bet it has something to do with the foods that you eat, you reintroduce. Is that true or not?
That's right. Well, here's what destroys the thyroid hormones: calorie restriction. I am not advocating for calorie restriction on any of those 6 fasts. Of course, you're going to restrict your calories for 3 days after you fast, but I have a whole explanation of how to reintroduce food, and then you should feast after you've gone through that process. So let's not get caught in understanding that fasting is calorie restriction. It is time restriction. So with my thyroid people, what I say is, go ahead and fast, and when you eat. Like, this is not a time, you don't diet once you go in to your to your eating window. For anybody, but especially for the thyroid people, you really need to power up on food.
And I think that's a critical point that Dr. Sims would probably really stress, is it's when more you fast, the easier it gets, oddly enough. Right?
That's right.
You kind of get used to it, and you think, oh, just because something's good for me, I should do it again, longer or more or whatever. And that's not necessarily the case. And so, especially, I'm speaking to those women who are having weight loss resistance, who are struggling, and who are exercising a lot, and who are just trying to restrict the amount of food they eat. They go and try fasting, and then they get into this really danger zone. So I really want you to stress, and as you did, is you got to eat. Like, if you're going to fast, you really got to eat during those windows. Even if, you think, I shouldn't be, or whatever, just eat very healthy food. Obviously, it's going to be really good for you. And so the next one, the truth or myth, you'll lose muscle when you fast. And this is maybe where we can talk a bit about the protein that you want.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So the first thing let's go with what the studies are showing. When we accumulate too much glucose and insulin, because we're in an insulin resistant state, and we have too many toxins, what our body does is it has to find a storage spot for the excess of all of those things. So there are three places it stores it in. It stores it in the liver, it stores it in fat, and it stores it in muscle. Those, especially glucose, that's where it's going to store all that excess. So when we are fasting, you're releasing those stores. So it does feel like, from a muscle level, when you're in a fasted state, it does feel like, oh my God, my muscles are shrinking, because you just released all the extra glucose that's in there from the fast. The longer the fast, the more your body's going to pull glucose from burning fat, from the liver, and from muscle. Now, here's the key. What are you going to add back in when you break your fast? And I really believe for women, it needs to be protein that first meal. So go in, if you're going to go into autophagy in a fast, saying 17 hours-ish, let's say then you work out in that fasted state. You've now really asked your muscles to be able to release glucose. Now, when you get home from that workout, you've pushed the muscle, you've broken the muscle down from your workout, power up on protein. And now you've gone into something called mTOR. And there is an amino acid sensor in our muscles that stimulate mTOR and growth within the muscle. And in order to trigger that amino acid, you have to have 30 grams of protein. So that first meal has to be 30 grams of protein. Now, the only other way around that scenario is that we're really experimenting with is having people do amino acid drinks in their fasting window. So put some amino acid powder into your fasting window. If you're worried that your muscles are going to break down too much, go into your workout with powered up with aminos, push those muscles, and then come out and eat more protein. So really the reason to eat protein is for the amino acids. And the reason that muscles grow is because of the amino acids. So I really, there are some hacks to that. There's something called protein cycling that I write about in the book. So I think that, again, we can't go to absolutes. It may appear that it shrinks while you're working out, but what are you doing after you work out? What are you doing after you fast? Those are really critical questions.
And just so people know as well, you lay out in the book different types of fasts, and it seems like the longer ones to sort of gently ease into it as well. So depending on the fast. So let's, everyone who's listening to this, there's many ways, and you just have to read the book. Don't just take this one example. So, okay. So then, I'm wondering if that's why Dr. Longo put in the Prolon his fasting mimicking diet. It's a package that you buy, and it's got a bunch of bars and nuts and olives and things, very little, and soups. And that, just so people understand, I don't know if they even know what the fasting mimicking diet, it's a 5-day fast, but with food. So it's to mimic a fast. Sometimes I think it's harder to do that than an actual fast, because you're actually activating hunger.
Glucose. Yeah, you're bringing glucose, so you don't fully get over into the fat burning system. So I agree, it's a lot harder.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think his audience is something else. He's trying to convince people who have cancer in a hospital to do a fast, and no one is going to go with that. So this was an option to try to convince those doctors and say, okay, let's try that. It's a bit more of a caloric restriction than an actual fast, but whatever. His science has shown that it does act, you get into this fasted state. But anyways, even with some of the soups, if you wore a blood glucose monitor, have you ever weighed your during the fast?
I haven't done it during Prolon, but those soups and the bars, I was like, this has honey in it. My gosh. So I never felt, I was hungry the whole week, whereas a whole 5 days, whereas if you just give me water fast within, 24 hours, I'm not hungry. So
it's crazy. But if I've had some clients wear the glucose monitor, and with the soups, their blood sugar just spikes. And I think it's because the rice flour, or trying to figure that out. And another person was bloated, I think, because of the inulin, and there's things again, some people love it. Some people not so much, but anyways. So I think the reason why he put in glycine. We had to drink. Remember, we have to drink something to preserve the muscle, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And glycine repairs the gut. So it's also helpful for the gut lining. So it also had a little, it was sweet. It had a little glucose in it, I believe, too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
My understanding on Volter was that he was really looking for, after he came out of his water study and he saw what it could do for cancer, the white blood cells, he was like, well, what else can we apply here? But I don't think everybody's going to go on a 3-day water fast. So what he did is he took principles of fasting and put it together in fast mimicking. And what they're trying to do with that is really interesting, because they are trying to get it into hospitals as a version of hospital food, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
But for the layperson, water fasting is a lot easier.
Yeah. It's free too, on top of it.
Free.
It's just, yeah, I think his positioning is for a certain purpose. And I think it's certainly better than the hospital food you get. And it would be, because, people argue as well Prolon is also a bunch of, processed foods, other than like the olives or something, but, it's still better than I think what you'd get in the hospital, and it's still a better choice. And if that helps, certainly, it's worth a try. So, okay, if you're going to fast, depending on the fast, don't worry about the muscle loss. Take a little bit of glycine, amino acids, and then you should be good to go. What about truth or myth? Your metabolism will slow down.
Yes, 100% myth. So this idea that 6 meals a day raises our metabolism, that is such a false belief that we've all bought into. I even went through that.
Me too.
So the easiest way to understand this is that you have 2 versions of metabolism, one that works off of the food you eat and one that works when you're fasting. So when you're eating 6 meals a day, you never go over to the fat burning system. You're only manipulating the energy burning, the blood sugar system. There's no proof. I mean, the other thing to think about is that if 6 meals a day sped up our metabolism, why do we have an obesity problem? Why is obesity getting worse? So why fasting is working so well and people are getting permanent weight loss results is because you're switching over into a whole different way to burn energy, and it comes from burning your fat. So it's a total myth.
Okay. So, okay, I'm going to stop here because I've caught like 20 other questions and I know we're not going to get through them, and I don't want to hog the mic as I always do. I want to give other people here a chance to speak or to share your thoughts. We've got maybe 10 minutes and then we have to let Dr. Mindy go. Paulina, how about unmuting and then you can ask Dr. Mindy a question.
Hi, how are you, Zora and Dr. Mindy? Such a pleasure talking to you guys today. So I've been intermittent fasting for a little over 3 years now. Last month, I started following some of the principles from your fasting cycle. I was taking some of your courses at the Reset Academy, and all the information just makes so much sense. So I'm really intrigued in applying them to my life and seeing if they really work for me. So a few days ago, I did my first 24-hour fast and it felt incredible. Now, my question is on muscle gain fasting and food intake. So before I got introduced to your fasting cycle principles, I was doing anywhere from 80 to 110 grams of protein a day. And from your fasting cycle, most days are kept at 50 grams a day. So my question is, would I be able to continue building muscle if I keep my protein intake 50 grams a day most of the time during my cycle, except for ovulation, where you recommend really upping that protein intake to take advantage of testosterone? So that's one of my questions. And my second question is, do you recommend following the whole cycle month after month, or is it something we should do just to get our hormones in check? And then once we have everything in check, can we play around with it a little bit? Say, if I want to do the 17-hour fast, but then during my eating window, do not keep, protein at 20 grams and be able to up that intake a little bit. Is that something we can do? Or would I be failing to get all the benefits from that kind of fast?
Yeah. Oh, great questions. So I love that you know what the fasting cycle is, and it's part of.
I'm so into it.
Yeah, it's such a fun tool. We actually are coming out with an app that will have the fasting cycle. Yeah, it'll be ready when the book is out, so that you could go in and you can put your day of your cycle, and it will tell you what fast and food is available to you. I know the first version will have pretty much the principles of the book. The second version will go into supplements and exercise and when to do a cold plunge, when to do, like, all of that's going to be timed. So super cool. Okay. On the protein thing, here's this was something I really debated when I wrote the book, is what is the best protein amount for women? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of evidence saying we need 1 gram of protein for every pound of our body weight. Mm-hmm. And I would say, based off the research I'm seeing, based off of living in a woman's body, based off of the people that I've worked with, is that there is some truth to that, but what we can't do is we cannot take in more than 90 grams of protein at one sitting. If we go above 90, it gets turned into glucose and turned to fat. So the challenge with the protein macro is that can happen, and protein can raise your blood sugar, which will pull you, start to affect things like weight loss. So if you are trying to lose weight, I strongly stick with my 50 grams in keto or 75 grams in ketobiotic. And I'm trying to remember, on the hormone feasting, I think I kept it close to 75 too. I think that's a good number if you're trying to lose weight. Once you're at your weight, like where you want to be, then I think you need to start to think about increasing the protein macro. I think you need to think about bringing it closer to 100, maybe even 150. Now, if you combine 100, let's say you're a 130-pound woman, and you're combining that with a fasting window of 15 hours, your best bet is to divvy up that 130, grams of protein, divvy it up into small meals. Every couple of hours, eat a more, 30 grams of protein, and then a couple hours later, another 30 grams. If you do that 4 times in your eating window, then you're getting all your protein requirements and you're getting the benefits of fasting. So that's one way to approach it. The other way is to, if you're like, I'm not going to get all that protein in my eating window, do the amino acid solution. Take aminos in a drink. If you are concerned about, going in a fasted state with a workout, take some aminos in a drink so you're powered up and you're getting that, because really protein's about that amino acid. So on that, does that help clarify a little bit for you?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Can I ask? Go ahead.
Sorry, just one little thing. One thing that I did notice when I was doing the longer fast, so anything after 17 hours, was that because I started tracking. I don't track my calories. I've never done that, but I started doing it because I just, I wanted to have a clear picture and everything. And I did notice that even though I hit the macros, my calorie intake was very low. Like I got to maybe a 1,100, 1,200 calories a day. And I work out every single day, at least a couple of hours. I do yoga, I do my training, my regular training. So I was concerned, is that calorie intake too low? And is it something that we really need to worry about? Because I've been reading a lot that calories aren't that important after all, if you're eating the right foods and, really nourishing your body.
I'm smiling because, it's got to be so confusing for lay people. Like, we show up and we're like, it's absolutely this. And this is why I'm trying to teach a system that you can apply and make it your own. So on the day that you noticed less calories, do you know how much protein you had that day?
Yeah, let me see.
Because I would say, of the 3 macros, protein is the hero. Protein's the one you want to lean into. Everybody thinks to get into the fat burning state, to get into keto, you have to up your fat. I disagree. I think you want to up your protein, especially for women. And when you do that, your calorie amount will get higher.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I did 50 grams of protein, 50 carbs, and then 60%, which I didn't hit. I did like 46% from good fats.
Yeah. So you might, for you, I would say, which would also lean into the next, to answer your second question, for you, I would say, start increasing your protein even on keto days. Okay. What I've noticed is that with people who wear a CGM, I don't know if you've put a CGM on, but the more you learn metabolic switching, where you can go from sugar burner to fat burner, the more those macros will be different, have a different reaction in your body. And what I'm seeing is when people are very metabolically flexible, when they eat protein or fat, their blood sugar stays the same or it dips, which is amazing. Yeah. But when we first come to fasting, if we've been doing a lot of the wrong oils, we've been eating more processed carbs, you eat protein and protein will spike glucose. But once those mitochondria are healthy, once you're metabolically flexible, protein actually is a stabilizer of the blood sugar and lets up that macro. Okay. In the book, I gave very individual macros. So because I'm writing to a big audience, but for you, I would say you're now at a point where you can increase it. And that leads to the second question, which was, in the book, I left two different formulas. I left the fasting cycle where you could choose your length fast, you can choose your more of the foods. And then I have the 30-day fasting reset where you can just follow day by day. For somebody who's as experienced as you, I would say, once you know your rhythm, like, what it feels like on day 7, that when you move into ovulation, that you need to eat more vegetables, that you're going to be more carb craving the week before your period. There becomes a flexibility with all these tools, and you stop counting macros, you stop looking at your ketone monitor or your CGM, and you just enjoy the fact that you're a woman that has these 3 incredible hormones that come in. And so you need to ebb and flow your diet and your workouts and your fasting with these incredible superpowers we've been given.
Cool. Great. Thank you so much.
Would love to hear, Paulina. So you are part of Mindy's program, right? You've gotten to the Resetter program.
Yeah, I discovered you on Instagram maybe like 3 months ago, and I went to the Reset Academy, and I've done like 3 of your courses already. I'm planning on doing every single one of them.
Awesome.
So yeah, I had PCOS since I was 15, insulin resistance, and then I kept going to doctors, and they just failed to help me out. So I started my own journey and studying on my own, and I've managed to get a completely healthy life now on my own, which is super interesting.
PCOS is all over my book. It's funny because I just read the Audible and I was like, I didn't realize how many times I said PCOS.
So common.
Yeah. And so in the new year, we're actually going to take that 30-day fasting reset, and we're going to do it as a group in the academy to make sure people have it mastered. But you're living example. That's exactly, because we have to know when to pull out the different tools, and that has to be timed to our hormones, and you're doing it. So congrats.
Thank you.
Oh, I love to hear that. So definitely anyone who's considering the Resetter program, I guess you could give it a 2 thumbs up, Paulina, right?
Oh yeah, 10 thumbs up, 10.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Do we have time for another question, Dr. Mindy? Yeah. Magdalena, how are you? She's always got great questions.
Hello, girls. Hello, Dr. Pelz. I'm always happy when I see that you will be the guest. I'm following your account for a long time, and I'm following your tips because I think there's always something right for me. I am following intermittent fasting since ever, but in the past we didn't know what this word means. So now I know perfectly, and I know that it's helping me, that I feel great. I'm 57, and I'm never planning anything, what I will eat, when I will start with the fast, when I will stop. I just know that after lunch, my body doesn't need any more else. It just needs, to proceed this food, to recover after it. And in the morning, I start with my breakfast. And since I follow you, I changed my porridges for the protein meals. Actually, what did I notice? Maybe that I have more, that I'm more strong in fitness because I go from Monday to Friday every day. And after my training, I have a lunch and then I stop. Now, I don't know if is this good or not. My intermittent fasting lasts, let me say, 16-8, 18-6, or 24. It depends of my schedules, during the day. But anyway, I always feel fine. You said before maybe that we should change this, I don't know if I'm doing okay or not, but my body feels great. On the other hand, you mentioned before all these hormones. And because I'm in menopause already for 6 years, I'm adding bioidentical hormones. So my question would be, what does it mean if we are intermittent fast every day and we are already in menopause for several years, and we are adding bioidenticals, so the levels of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone is very great in my case. My gynecologist confirmed it. It can't be better. It's much better than it was, 10 years ago when I was not menopausal yet. So this would be my question. If we are adding bioidenticals, how then body reacts? Also thyroid, I'm adding T4 or 5. So that's my question. Thank you so much to be with us.
No, it's a great question. So, and it's something that we haven't addressed on this call yet. And I think it's important for the postmenopausal women to hear. So you still have to take all three hormones into consideration. So the way that you're going about it right now is you're doing a great job of helping estrogen and probably a really good job of helping testosterone. But what are you doing for progesterone? And so the way I interpret what you just said to me is that I would call you an expert faster. You have a good foundation of fasting. So when you do a 15-hour fast or a 17-hour fast, it doesn't spike cortisol because your body's used to it now. So there is a little nuance there. Now, having said that, you still need glucose to be high on certain days to make progesterone. So even though the bioidenticals are there helping support progesterone, ultimately we want to use your lifestyle as a tool to make sure that we're facilitating the best production of these hormones. So you could do one of two things. One day a week, you just don't fast and you step into more of what I call hormone feasting foods. Make sure you're not going into ketosis. Make sure that you're doing more of the higher, like the root vegetables, the potatoes, the sweet potatoes, beans, citrus fruit, tropical fruits. I list them all out in the book. So you need to have a hormone feasting day. Now you can choose to do that day with or without a fast. And I'm only saying that to you because you are an expert faster. So if 15 hours is like so easy, it's not spiking cortisol. Mm-hmm. So just make sure that when you go into food, you're increasing glucose on that day, at least one day a week, maybe even 2 days a week. For the women listening to this that are the same age as you, that are also postmenopausal and they're new to fasting, I say 1 to 2 days a week, no fasting. And we need to step into the hormone feasting foods. But once you become fat adapted, a small little intermittent fasting, 13 to 15 hours combined with the hormone feasting foods will keep your progesterone levels, combined with bioidenticals, that will keep your progesterone levels where you want them to be.
Thank you so much for this answer, because, I was a little bit afraid. Maybe I'm just fasting too much, but now I'm okay with this answer. And I know I do the right thing because actually my body feels great and I don't want to change anything, because why should I change if I really feel the best, Yeah. So now I'm happy with the answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is make sure you listen to your body, because like I can tell you as a 53-year-old woman, who I was 160 days into no cycle. This was recently. And then 2 weeks ago, I got my cycle again. But here's what happened. The week before I got it, all of a sudden I was waking up and I'm like, I'm famished. Why am I so hungry? And my brain translated that into, oh, I need progesterone. So I stepped out of fasting. I'm a huge sweet potato fan. I ate a ton of sweet potatoes. I came in with all the root vegetables. I did hormone feasting for a week, and boom, my period came. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting that my progesterone was knocking, and I listened to her, and there was another cycle to be had. So make sure if you wake up one morning and you're hungry, that may be progesterone telling you, I need a little more fuel today.
That was exactly what happened to me like 5 days ago. And I was just at that point of reading your book about feeding the progesterone, supporting progesterone. So for 2 days, and my period was late. I'm like, okay, maybe this is menopause coming. And then I ate the potatoes and I had a bit of quinoa. And for 3 days, boom, my period started. I was like, I can't believe that.
It's crazy. And, I think the hardest group for me to teach are the perimenopausal women. So we have to get to know the characteristics of these 3 hormones. And I can, when estrogen is like coming in full force for me, I can fast, like I can almost go all day and just be like, whatever, was I supposed to eat today? But when progesterone comes in, she's like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I need carbs like now. And so we have to learn to read those symptoms. It's just a little more navigating.
Great. One more question, or do you have to go?
Yeah, we can go one more.
Okay. Kaya, last question. You got it. If you can unmute.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm already in my PG, so I can put my video on, but I'm listening. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Mindy also, so I'm happy for listening to you. So I don't know. I think I don't really have a question, because it's like I'm the same as Magdalena. I'm 34, but it's like I'm fasting already all my life. Just like that, I didn't know before that I'm actually fasting. Maybe like I can put my insight into the story, because I did an Ironman, a half Ironman at Kona, and I was following Dr. Sim's advices. And I think she has really good advices for when you are like doing triathlons and like heavy sports. But after that, I had huge problems like putting down my weight because I gained like a lot of muscle mass and everything. And once I started fasting, it's like the drop weight was like in a minute, I would say. So I think it's really like fasting is a magical tool. I'm also a nutritionist and personal trainer, and it's like I'm also teaching my clients how to fast correctly. And I'm seeing like a lot of results, like good ones. And but like you are saying, I think it's so important what you are saying, that 1 week before the period that you eat, that you are not. And I'm also saying that it's like fasting is not like counting calories. It's not like, it's like you need to eat. That's very important. I think that I love everything that you are teaching, and I completely agree with you. So I think maybe like Dr. Stacy Sims is more for like people who are really like heavy sporters, like, triathlons and during marathons and everything. And I think it's like your knowledge is so important, like for everyday people who do like normal kind of sports, let's say. So I agree with you that fasting is a miracle, but we just need to do it correctly. I think that's important, very important.
Your story brings up a really good point. So thank you for sharing it. We can both be right. Like, like I agree like that. I'm not trying to train for triathlons right now. Exactly. That is not what, and so my teachings don't reflect that. Exactly. So her strategies may be amazing for that. Exactly. But I'm trying to teach great hormonal health, how to keep your weight at a good spot. Like, so to your point, you could use both of the principles.
Exactly.
You just need to know when to pull them out.
No, exactly. Like I said, when I was doing triathlons, I was following her advices and her book, but it's like when I'm now like normal, doing normal sports and having normal life, I'm following your advices, and I think that's the right combination.
So interesting, right?
So at the end of the day, I think that even if you're, a full-on athlete, you should still be able to do that switch between being a sugar burner and a fat burner.
That's for sure, yes.
And what I've seen from my experience is that the more I try to follow the principles of the prehistoric man, that's what best works for us. And it makes sense, over so many million years, we evolved as that kind of, with that lifestyle. And it's been only the last, 300 years that we've been having all these changes in our lifestyle and foods. Yeah. And it makes sense that we're more compatible with what has been going on for a million years than only the last few 300, 500 years, whatever. So yeah, super interesting. Yeah, there's so much to talk about.
One of the concepts I wrote about in the book that when I was researching it doesn't get discussed enough is what they call the thrifty gene hypothesis, that they believe that in our primal days, the humans that were able to survive going without food for so many days, actually genetically they had a gene that turned on in the absence of food that made them stronger. And so they survived. The ones that didn't have that gene died. And we have now, that gene is in our human body now today. So when we're eating all day, we're actually going against our genetic makeup. Yeah. So, but then, if you look at like Stacy's ideas around training, okay, you could dip into that for a little while and then come back and dip back into the fasting cycle the way I teach it. So I really love this conversation because this is what I'm advocating for, is us understanding our own bodies and when to pull which tool out. And what we've done in the diet culture and the nutrition culture is we've gotten really dogmatic. And we've said, this is the way, this is the only way. Now, maybe for a man's body, but not for a woman's body. And then in a woman's body, we can't even say this is the absolute way for every woman. So what I'm trying to do is teach women to understand themselves and know when to pull these tools out.
And it also depends, really, it depends so much. I see it on my clients, if they need to lose weight or if they are burnout. This is like two completely different kinds of stories, like we said, I mean,
totally different stories.
Also a stress for the body. So, and it's like, if somebody is trying to lose weight, great. But if somebody is burnout, I think they should be careful with fasting. So
great. Yeah. Excellent. Well said.
Well, thank you so much. Everyone has been having such great questions and contributions. I think the big takeaway here is to know your body, get to know yourself, play around with different modalities. And there's not one size fits all. And I think that's what Dr. Mindy Pelz has explained in the book really, really well. And so if you are an exercise enthusiast or athletic, again, it's got to be, you can get to that point where you are constantly feeding and maybe feeding too much and you do need a break. And that's where maybe fasting can come in. Or if you're certainly not eating enough calories and you're not getting in enough food, well, that's maybe take a break with the fasting, you're going to still go to sleep. So there will still be a fasting window, whether you like it or not, because you should be sleeping and rebuilding your body. But I think this has been a really great conversation that needed to be had. There's too much confusion, and women, of course, are very confused, and we're a different being altogether. So remember that everything that you're hearing in the health studies in this health world may or may not apply to you. But I think Dr. Mindy's done it really well. She's got her own mega experiment going on right now, ongoing, continuing with her fasting, resetter group. She's seen thousands of women go through it. The studies just haven't been done, but I think this is as close as we're going to get right now. If you want to get the book, you can pre-order it. I think this podcast is going to release only a day or two before the book is out. So you can go to fastlikeagirl.com/pre-order. You can always find Dr. Mindy Pelz on Instagram. It's Dr. Mindy Pelz, Facebook and YouTube, similar things. I'll have the links in the show notes. It'll all be here. Is there anything else I missed? Any last words, Dr. Mindy, before we let you go?
No, I really loved this conversation. I go on a lot of interviews, and I have to say, Zora, I really love this. And thank you to you gals that jumped in and gave your feedback, because I agree. I am on an ongoing experiment, and I want the feedback to hear from people. The next book that I am going to be tackling is mental health for women over 40 and what happens to our hormones and neurotransmitters. So one of the things we've done is just really listen to women and hear their experiences. So yeah, I loved this conversation. So thank you for facilitating it. It was great.
Where can people get a part of your Facebook group? The fast, I can't remember the exact name of the fasting resetters or resetter.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a couple. Yeah, it's a couple places. So we have a free fasting group on Facebook. It's called the Resetter Collaborative.
Yes.
A lot of great resources in there. A lot of people, a lot of fasting experts, but I have admins in there that make sure that we keep it really consistent with my teachings. If you need more help with fasting, like how to customize it for you, I have my Reset Academy, which has been amazing. And in helping, I lead classes. We do so much. We do monthly experiences. It's a ton of fun. Since this will come out 2 days before the book, we are joining forces with Hay House. And we are doing a 3-day water fast the first week in June for anybody who purchases the book. I'll be leading women, men will probably join it as well, through a 3-day water fast. So if you're looking for something to do in the new year, you're kind of curious how to do a water fast, stay tuned for information on that.
So January, I think you said June.
Oh, sorry, January. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, January.
I was like, oh.
Thank you for pointing out. No, it'll be January 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Oh my goodness. Perfect timing. I think everybody will be ready for a fast.
Yeah. So if you want to do a 3-day water fast and be guided through it, and I'm going to give options for people who maybe only want to go a day or 2 days. We'll talk about that, but stay tuned for information on that.
Probably a good idea. I mean, I really would like to do that, and I'm going to try, but I probably shouldn't be exercising during those 3 days. Is that correct?
Never exercise during a 3-day water fast. That is an absolute no. Anything over 24 hours is a no exercise, because to Stacy's point, it's stress upon stress.
Mm. Great. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited. You've cleared out so much confusion. I really appreciate you. I'm going to have you on, if you can, when you get that new book out. Every time a new book comes out, you just got to come on, because
of course. Thank you. Well, the new one will be out October 24. So we got a few years, but yes, good. Thank you. I would love to come on when that one comes out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who's been listening, who is here. Thank you, Dr. Mindy, for your time. And we will see you hopefully again. Have a good day, good night, good morning, wherever you are at.